the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchion Ford. Bird Culchion Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And welcome in, everybody, to a brand new edition of the Bearcast on SicEm365.com and the Baylor Athletics on SicEm365 YouTube channel. It is Tuesday, November the 5th, 2024, and we are coming to you after a pretty massive win for Baylor football and the start of basketball season as well for Baylor Athletics. Not the brightest of starts for Scott Drew and the men as they get underway against Gonzaga. We'll be touching on that, but obviously a massive win for Dave Aranda and the football program against TCU, 37-34. Bears with a dramatic walk-off victory on Saturday night at McLean Stadium amidst a bunch of festivities, and we will be talking about that and hoops and much more throughout the broadcast today. Garrett Ross behind the scenes. I'm Craig Smoak. That's Grayson Grundhoefer, and, well, what a win for this Baylor football team that now sees itself at 5-4, 3-0 during its second stretch of the season, and heading into a bye week now. They will return to finish this thing out next week with a 3-game stretch and hope to win at least one of those 3 to get bowl eligible, if not try to win all 8. But what a win, Grayson, and the long time coming. We had talked about that throughout the past few days, the streaks that they've been going through and enduring, and in some cases breaking, like winning a big road game, like winning a close game, like winning this and that. Well, they won a big home game, they won a big close game, they won a big rivalry game, and snapped a big streak against that rival in terms of just being utterly dominated over the last decade. And they did so in front of the 2013 and 14 teams and a blacked-out crowd. So, I don't know, pretty special stuff on Saturday night.
It was. I mean, in dramatic fashion, obviously, with the way that it occurred. But huge win for the program. And, I mean, that's 3 wins in a row. And they really just, I mean, they've played so much better. There's clearly momentum. You beat your 3 biggest rivals, especially on the recruiting trail, in consecutive weeks. So it's been very impressive. Beating TCU, getting that monkey off your back was a big one. And, you know, honestly, you sat there throughout this game and you kind of felt like that 1-8 was kind of, you know, you're sitting there going, oh no, is this going to go the wrong way again? Is this just going to, you know, be bad luck or a bad play here or there? TCU's going to find a way to win this game. You have that feeling in the back of your head, but I don't think Baylor allowed that to get to them at all. They found a way to get the job done all night, and, you know, pretty much behind a very consistent rushing attack. That was something that has been huge since the bye week, and it just continues to get better and better.
Yeah, some pretty big performances. Bryson Washington really putting on a huge showing. 26 carries, 196 yards, 4 touchdowns. Also had a couple of catches as well for 22 yards. So he finishes with over 200 all-purpose yards. He was the Big 12 newcomer of the week. But you also had Sawyer Robertson, not with the gaudy stats day, but with some big-time throws throughout that game. And then just some, you know, timely plays and important conversions and big catches and, yeah, a lot of just things going the way that they needed to go for this team to win as opposed to the way things went earlier in the season in similar games like this. Colorado being a prime example of that, where they didn't make the play to convert the 4th down, or they didn't make the big catch to move the chains, or to get into field goal range better, or to make a tackle that makes a difference. I mean, they did a lot of things to lose in the first part of the season or to not win. And now, over this 3-game stretch, they've seemingly learned how to win. And I think part of that's the schedule lightening up, but I think it's also just this team improving on a weekly basis. So here they are, again, 5-4, and heading into a bye week and at 500 in the Big 12 after an 0-3 start. So feeling pretty good and feeling great about beating TCU, since that was the first time in so long. And I said it during one of my either the podcast or the writing, maybe even both. But I was happy for the younger Baylor fans to be able to experience something like this, because most people that have been following for a while got to see 61-58 and know all about those teams. And it was cool to see them and everything on Saturday, but I'm not sure how much really the younger people know exactly how special those teams were, other than just what they see. Like, I saw old teams And I know I didn't fully appreciate them. Like, oh, yeah, I bet they were good. That's cool. But I didn't really get it. I don't know how much the younger fans got how good those teams were, but they got a little taste of what it was like to follow those teams. They got a little taste of 61-58 with their own version, 37-34 on Saturday night. So I was happy for those fans, those home fans, to experience rushing the field in a meaningful way, not just doing it for the sake of doing it because you won a game, because that's definitely happened before. But this actually had a purpose to it because you walked off your rival for the first time in a long time. So that was very cool to see. And let's dive into the game itself here and just go ahead and start breaking it down. And then we'll turn our attention to some other things that are on the item list this week. But this game opened up with back and forth as far as punts go. TCU going 3 and out, and Baylor, a nice drive looked like early on, but it stalls out eventually, and they're forced to punt after 9 plays as a big sack backs them up into a situation where they really couldn't afford to go for it. 4th and 17, even though you're in TCU territory, that's just you're just in no man's land, basically. So they punt the ball back to TCU and seemingly pin TCU down at the 5-yard line, but the Frogs put on a hell of a drive and go 95 yards in pretty quick fashion, a little over 3 minutes, 7 plays, and they open the scoring as Josh Hoover hits Jordan Bailey, and it's 7-0 on the 3rd drive of the game as TCU, as I said, goes 95 after the Palmer Williams punt. So I don't think anybody's panicking. First score of the game, you know it's going to be a probably pretty close game. That's life in the Big 12. That's life as a Baylor fan. And that's life in this series between these two teams, with the exception of when TCU has just blown them out on occasion. But you kind of felt this was going to be a close game because they're pretty evenly matched. So they opened the scoring, and that's how we got this one started, really.
Right, and you knew that Baylor wasn't going to be able to hold TCU down for the whole game. Getting that opening stop, you kind of felt like, okay, Baylor might be able to come out here, gain some momentum, go up by a score, especially since you get that opening kind of scripted plays for Baylor. And they drove right down the field, and then, of course, you run into the roadblock with the sack. So that stalls them. TCU created some explosive plays on their drive, which was the theme of the day for them. Explosive plays, especially in the passing game, and that allowed them to get down the field and then obviously capitalize to go up 7-0.
Baylor would respond, though, with a nice drive, their own 10 plays, 65 yards, a lot of Bryson Washington, and you got the sense early they were going to be able to run the ball, and run the ball they would all night long. Dawson Pendergrass added to this, but it was mostly the Bryson Washington show. Sawyer threw it a little bit on this drive to Michael Trigg for a nice gain of 16 yards, but this was basically Bryson Washington with a couple of Sawyer passes, and they're able to move it downfield, and Bryson Washington caps it off. 8-yard touchdown run. Little did we know this was the first of what would be a massive night for him. As I said on Twitter, I said if you had a quarter for every time Bryson Washington scored, you'd have $1 by the end of the night. So here was number one, the 25 cents to start this off with, and it was 7-7.
Yeah, and he gets a touchdown vultured a little bit later in the game that could have been number 5 for him as well. But, I felt like this was kind of this statement between these first 2 drives for Baylor. The biggest thing they did was run the football, which in my eyes they were going to have to do in this game. TCU's definitely stronger in their secondary. So Baylor being able to run the football and run consistently early, even before TCU got tired and had to rely on their depth, was huge. And as we saw later in the game, if you're able to wear on a team like that, you can really start to exert yourself. And I think Baylor really did that to open this game up.
TCU would follow up with a punt, had a penalty early on that drive. Baylor would get the ball back. They would punt after a penalty hurt their drive. And then TCU, another punt, 3 and out. So now we suddenly get into a little bit of a stalemate, but the scoring would return a few drives later after punt. Baylor 4 plays, 64 yards. And, it was a situation in this game where you could just tell early there was that kind of feeling in the air of this was going to be a kind of a shootout almost, because you traded punts, but then this would basically get the kind of ball rolling for the rest of the game. And you just felt like Baylor was going to be able to move the football, and you felt like TCU was probably going to be able to move the football, even though we had some stops early in this game. But it's Bryson Washington, once again, a big 40-yard run as he explodes for a big gain and the type of runs that we didn't really see all that much of the last couple of seasons. But since he's been healthy, and now especially these last, 2 or 3 games, he's starting to really find a groove, and they didn't have runs like this. I mean, again, I'll say it again, 40-yard runs are rare around here, but maybe not so much anymore. He's in the end zone, touchdown number 2 in the second quarter. This makes it 14-7. No, wait a second. They're going to have their first, what the heck is going on? Let's try and lose this game tonight. And I'm glad that we know the story at the end and that this didn't come back to be a really bad mistake in this game, but a missed extra point. How does it was rainy sort of off and on, like I guess throughout the weekend. It was windy all throughout the game. I don't know what the conditions were like on the field. All I know is I saw that missed extra point, and I go, oh, my gosh, like that is absolutely going to matter in this game. And it would. It would matter in this game up until the end. But regardless, you score. It's just that when you miss an extra point after scoring, it almost always comes back to haunt you, and it almost always kills some of the momentum. That wouldn't necessarily be the case here, but, 13-7, and that dampened the touchdown a little bit because you knew that was hanging there. You
did, and you also sat back and went, oh no, Baylor still has a kicking problem, which they've had all year long. And so, for him to miss an extra point, Hankins, that is, was huge. Also, let's not forget there was a false start as well. So it was a little bit longer of an extra point, but I'm not going to make too many excuses because TCU's kicker seemed to be kicking just fine. And so, you kind of have to be able to balance that out. You got to make your extra points. Obviously, he makes up for it later. But you're right. I mean, you look at this game, and early on, there wasn't a lot of scoring. Like, I sat there and I was like, well, I predicted this to be I think I had it 40-30 or something like that. So a 70-point game. And early on, I'm like, wow, are they even going to make it to 60? That's kind of what it felt like early on in this game. So you needed all the points you could possibly get. But really, what it came down to at the end is man, if you had that extra point, you're forcing TCU to go for 2 one of these times, and it could have been huge.
Yep, yeah, you could have lost just based on that. The way the game went, when you're tying back and forth late in the game, your whole time going, well, if they had that 1 point, TCU's chasing or having to go for 2, like you said. But it's 13-7. Baylor takes the lead, and then they don't really close the first half all that well. And you kind of wondered at halftime of uh-oh, are we about to turn into another TCU win? But here's the reason why is TCU drives down the field, 8 plays, 47 yards. They do get a delay of game that backs them up from a 4th and 4 to a 4th and 9. And so they decide to go ahead and kick the field goal. And going into this game, they really weren't all that solid in terms of kicking statistically. It was not a strength of theirs, but you wouldn't have known it. Kyle Lemmerman just booting these things through it's no. I was like, I don't know what happened in previous games, but he actually was pretty sturdy on this night. He boots through a 46-yarder. So that makes it 13-10. And again, that extra point's already hanging out there. Instead of being up 14-10, you're up by a field goal. Nevertheless, Baylor goes 3 and out. TCU gets the ball back, goes 11 plays, 68 yards, and the Baylor defense, the warning signs are going off already in this game because TCU is just being able to kind of sling it around a little bit, and there's no real answer for the pass defense for most of the night. That was, if there's a negative to take away, it was certainly the pass defense and not being able to get pressure on Josh Hoover, not being able to force a turnover. But TCU, we know Josh Hoover can throw it around. It's just a matter of who he throws it to. But on this night, he protected the football. They didn't force him into any errors, and he was just zipping it around. And when they needed some ground game, they gave it to Savion Williams, and he normally got them what they needed to get to keep things going on. Most of the time on this drive, it was a little bit of Eric McAllister, a little bit of Drake Dabney. They ran the ball actually a little bit on that drive to Jeremy Payne. Jack Besh got involved, and eventually it is a 1-yard Josh Hoover touchdown run after 11 plays, and they take the lead 17-13 with just a little under 4 minutes to go before halftime.
And there was some missed tackles in general by Baylor as well. I would say that was another negative of the day. And on this drive, that Jeremy Payne 16-yard reception that got them down to the 1, it was initially ruled a touchdown. I mean, it was like you had him down at like the 15-yard line, and just a missed tackle, and he ends up getting all the way down to the 1-yard line, and you're just kind of giving up points at that moment. So that was a little bit frustrating. I think that you're right. The secondary and then the tackling were two areas that I also, kind of focused on after this game, I think.
So Baylor would get the ball back with not that much time to really do much, about 45 seconds when the clock starts rolling. They are able to move it into TCU territory, but just stall out there basically. Don't have any time remaining to move it any further. So halftime arrives with them with the ball in their hands at the TCU 37 and trailing, headed into the locker room 17-13. And how are you feeling at this point?
I'm feeling okay. I will say on this drive was the one where Trigg caught the ball and was trying to get out of bounds and got tackled inbounds. So then the clock ran out. If he gets out of bounds, maybe Baylor attempts to kick what would have been, a 50-yard field goal. Going to that side of the field probably would have been a lot to ask. But I just think in general, this felt like kind of some missed opportunities for Baylor a little bit in the first half. It felt like they had some opportunities to maybe build up a little bit of a lead, especially when they were able to stop TCU, which actually happened quite a bit in the first half. It's just not going to happen very much in the second half. So, yeah, that's kind of where I was at. I still felt good about where Baylor was at, the game plan, the fact that they could run the football, but also felt like they had missed some chances.
Yeah, and you wondered if that would come back to haunt them. So they run out of time on the final drive before half. Good news is they get the ball to start the second half. Bad news is they go 3 and out and move backwards. Not a good opening sequence as Sawyer Robertson gets sacked on 3rd and 9. And that forces them, after a false start penalty right after that, into a 4th and 20. And Palmer Williams actually boots it. Long kick goes out of bounds. So TCU gets the ball back to start the second half. On their first drive, they're able to get a field goal as Kyle Lemmerman is good from 47 yards out. So he was pretty dang good on the night. They got hit by an eligible downfield penalty that hurt them a little bit on this drive, making a 2nd and 9, a 2nd and 14. They fumbled the ball, got back on top of it. So they kind of fumbled away the end of that drive as they got into Baylor territory. So they settled for the 47-yard field goal, which that actually turns out to be a pretty big deal because every point would matter in this outcome. And it would also be a big deal because there are 7 drives remaining in this game after this TCU field goal. And of those 7 drives, 6 of them will result in points for one of these two teams. So only one drive the rest of the game with 9:04 left in the third quarter. We'll see an actual punt or no score at the end of it. So that's what we're about to head into here.
Right, and I mean, this drive by TCU was a good one, but also this was the opportunity here. Cam Cook fumbles the football. You're like, Baylor needs to get on it. They're unable to. Now it kind of makes up for the one that Sawyer fumbled a little bit earlier in the game and was able to get back on top of. But Baylor wasn't able to force turnovers. This was kind of a moment, an opportunity to get one. But either way, they forced a long field goal, and you're exactly right. I mean, Lemmerman, a 46-yarder and a 47-yarder in that windy environment, was pretty clutch for a guy that was the number 1 kicker in all of high school coming into his freshman year.
So the Bears need to respond down a touchdown, and they do. 9 plays, 75 yards. Sawyer Robertson throwing it around to Hal Presley. Dawson Pendergrass getting some gains. Sawyer Robertson, again, Monterey Baldwin gets a 40-yard gain, a huge play down to the TCU 9-yard line. But then a nice run from Dawson Pendergrass gets pushed back by a false start play later. So you negate some of the, first and goal.
This was the one where it was like they didn't know what to call.
And there was
this
an illegal
is where
substitution,
the boos were out. So they had to review it. They kept stopping the plays. Baylor throws a touchdown. They stop the play, take it away. Spavital's on the field yelling like, hey, man, how many plays am I going to show TCU during this drive? And then finally they get it back to where, now it's at the 1-yard line again. Just a complete debacle by the whole referee crew, and the stadium let them know it. I mean, that was one of the loudest moments of the game.
Yeah, the official sequence was a false start on Baylor, but then TCU also had an illegal substitution. And then Dawson Pendergrass runs for 1, then false start again on Baylor. And yes, they're throwing it in the end zone. They're converting. There's a whistle blown. It's a total S show, basically, for lack of a better term, by the officials here. And yes, stadium boos are raining down on top of the Zebras as they should. I don't think I've ever seen an entire play ran and converted to a touchdown, but a whistle's blown like as the play's going on already and nearly completed, and then you blow the whistle like as the touchdown's being finished off to then say that you need to clarify the play right before that.
That you got it right. That's what they were saying.
But they're not changing anything. You're just saying, like, just so you know we got that right. As this other play is being ran successfully, that you now also are wiping off the board, which is a pretty critical play. It was just a total – I'm glad Brett Yormark was there. I wrote this as well. Like, I'm glad he got to see that just junk exhibition by his officials there in the third quarter that seemingly went on for like 10 minutes, it felt like at least. But nevertheless, Baylor overcomes all of this just debacle of refereeing here on this drive, and they do still punch it in despite the Big 12 officials as they who was it on here?
Pendergrass. Just a 1 yard run because it was just, I don't even know how to explain it because they move them back to the 6 and then they blow the whistle. Right.
Yeah.
They blow the whistle again and say, oh, wait, we're going to review it. And it's like, dude, they were not only offsides, they also had 12 men on the field. And nothing was called, and then they called a false start on Baylor. It was a crazy sequence. Ultimately, it's a 1 yard touchdown run for Dawson Pendergrass.
And then to top it off, a false start on the extra point attempt. So then they also have to back up 5 yards and then re-kick the extra point attempt. So it was – I don't buy into, like, rigged things and all that, although in this era I do wonder more than ever with all of the gambling because that's all anybody cares about in sports now is just betting on it. So I do wonder sometimes. I don't usually lean that way, but this was one of those stretches where you're just like, all right, seriously, who's got money on this game to where you're stopping it down, you're blowing or you're blowing whistles mid-play to explain the previous play, which never happens. Like, it made no sense. It was a bad look, and it felt like, yeah, they're out to, like, screw Baylor on this drive, but it can't be that blatant, right? And regardless, it was a successful drive ultimately as Baylor does punch it in as Dawson Pendergrass runs it in from 1 yard out. So you're tied up at 20. You've passed that moment in the game, thankfully, but your defense is not there to help you out, at least on the following drive, as TCU goes 9 plays, 75 yards. More penalties on this drive for Baylor, so the ref show wasn't entirely done, and it really did have you wondering at that point, like, all right, what the heck is going on here? That would subside really, truly this time as this drive got about to the midway point, and it just became TCU moving the football to Eric McAllister and Jeremy Payne through the air, a couple of runs, and then eventually Savion Williams and the Wildcat on 4th down and 2 at the Baylor 6 yard line. Kendall Browse, you can tell like they were searching for anything because I swear they unloaded like the entire playbook on like every Wildcat thing possible, every trick play. And I know they didn't unload every trick play, but it sure felt like they were not running a normal offense. No. They were trying desperately to just create things. And Savion Williams was as much the quarterback on Saturday as Josh Hoover was. I mean, in some ways, not throwing the football, but here he did. And so it was a brilliant play call on 4th and 2. And Jack Betch is in the end zone to regain the lead for TCU, 27-20.
And this was the first of 2 very frustrating penalties by one of Baylor's best players in Jackie Marshall, because this is the drive where 2nd and 11, I think Baylor gets a sack on this play, and he gets called for the unsportsmanlike penalty, and that gets TCU an automatic first down on what would have been like 3rd and 18 on that drive. And instead it ends up being a first down. They end up scoring. But again, like this is the second time in 2 weeks that Baylor has allowed a touchdown throw by essentially a running back. Because Ollie Gordon threw, I guess it wasn't a touchdown, but a 2-point conversion. It was basically the same play. And it's just like, man, 4th and 2, I feel like you kind of got to see that coming a little bit, but unable to. They get beat in the back of the end zone, and it's a touchdown. It was a really good play call, really gutsy play call on 4th and 2 to have Savion throw the football, but paid off for TCU. But again, costly penalty for Baylor on that drive.
So, yeah, it was a string of just penalties, whether they were self-inflicted or whether they were the officials doing whatever they were doing there in the third quarter for a few minutes. It was just a bad stretch, and TCU does regain the lead, but in a show that this team wasn't going to go away and that they're not the same Baylor team perhaps from earlier in the year. 5 plays, 75 yards. They tie the game again. Now, again, you tie the game here, you should be up by a point because that's where this missed extra point's coming into play, where you're just tying as opposed to it's 28-27, it's 27-27, but it was a quick drive. It was a much-needed response to close the third quarter and start the fourth quarter. And it eventually, after 5 plays, ends on that 5th play with Bryson Washington after a big chunk to Josh Cameron. He goes 35 yards for a touchdown. So huge explosive play. It's 27-27 as we start the fourth quarter, and we're setting up for a photo finish at this point.
Really good design on the 3rd and 3 play, which was a QB power type play, which Baylor ran a few times when they really needed to get a first down. I think they're going to go for it on a 4th down with that same kind of play call a little bit later, but that was a huge one. The Josh Cameron reception, obviously a big play there. And then, of course, Bryson just doing what Bryson did all day, which was create explosive plays, break tackles, make guys miss in the secondary. He just had a special night, and obviously this 35-yard touchdown was another example of that.
So it's 27-27, and here's where the game starts to change a little bit as Sonny Dykes makes a call that he wishes he could have back. TCU tied up at 27, gets the ball, and is able to get it to around midfield. But then Josh Hoover hits Jeremy Payne on 3rd and 6 for 4 yards, and it is now a 4th down and 2 at the Baylor 46-yard line. You're tied at 27. There's 10:22 left on the clock. It's 4th and 2. You're in Baylor territory, and quite frankly, you've been picking up yards. I don't know how there was even a shadow of a doubt of what to do here, and somehow a guy like Sonny Dykes, of all people, decides to punt the football, and Ethan Crawl comes out and punts it 27 yards, and this was basically the end of the game for so many reasons. It wasn't, but it was, because this was basically gutless, I mean, in so many ways. And later on, Dave Aranda would be the complete opposite of that and do the ballsiest of things. And I do believe that that was rewarded versus the let's play it safe, even though we're Kendall Briles and Sonny Dykes and we're known for the air raid and this and that, and we can't go for it on 4th and flipping 2 at the Baylor 46-yard line. I don't get that. And it's not like Baylor's defense was playing well. I mean, so this one, thank you, Sonny. You have to say, if you're a Baylor fan, if you're Dave, like, thank you, pal, for the assist there, because that was totally self-inflicted. And had they gone for it, I have almost no doubt in my mind they would have probably converted and then finished out this drive, because Baylor wasn't stopping them. They stopped themselves here, and they punt, and we'll get into what that led to.
I was completely shocked. I mean, I had, like you said, there was no doubt in my mind they were going for it. For sure, just 4th and 2, oh yeah, they're definitely going for this. You're right around midfield. You're actually on the Baylor side of the 50, and I could not believe they didn't go for it. Now, I think that they did have some concerns about running the football, so you were going to force Josh Hoover to throw it, and it's like, yeah, well, Josh Hoover throwing the football was really good on this night. So I was pretty stunned by that. You're exactly right. I think, Baylor got rewarded for their gutsy play calling, and Sonny Dykes just shockingly, kind of decided not to. I understand trying to play the field position game, but also, like, the punt went 27 yards. Baylor got the ball at the 20, so it was basically like you kicked a touchback, and it didn't really impact anything at all. It's not like you were able to down them inside the 10 or inside the 5 or anything like that.
So there is a little over 10 minutes remaining. We're tied at 27. Baylor getting the ball back after TCU elects to punt. And this would turn into a 13-play drive that would take about 5.5 minutes off of the clock and go 81 yards. A lot of Bryson Washington on this drive, but a lot of Sawyer Robertson as well. Hits Hal Presley for 13. Hits Ashton Hawkins for 14. He runs a little bit. Bryson Washington some more. Sawyer Robertson on the ground some more. A big 12-yard. Then you get to the 4th and 2, excuse me.
Big play.
And TCU calls a timeout to get their defense set up. 4th and 2 at the TCU 29-yard line as Baylor's on this lengthy drive. And Sawyer Robertson on a critical keeper gets 3 yards and moves the chain to set up 1st and 10 at the TCU 26. So a massive conversion there. Sonny Dykes would have punted it, I guess. Although, no, I mean, they were deeper in TCU territory. But still, I mean, that was that was the play you go back to in this game, man, other than the one that's about to come up here in a little while, another fourth down that was the ballsy call on the night. But Sawyer Robertson converts. He hits Michael Trigg for another first down, and then he and Bryson Washington go back and forth the next 3 plays, picking up 8, 5, and then Bryson Washington, the 1-yard touchdown on 1st and goal at the TCU 1. He bullies his way in. Baylor takes the lead 34-27 after a beautiful drive that took time off the clock, that went a long ways on a lot of plays, and converted a big 4th down. And you're just like, all right, defense, go get a stop now. They wouldn't, spoiler, but this was a moment that you felt pretty good that they had regained the lead and that this offense was moving the football.
And I felt like this game was over after this. I thought I had just everything in my mind said, okay, here comes Josh Hoover throwing a pick. Like, that's what's about to happen on this next drive. Obviously, that is not what happened, but Baylor just wore on their defense again. And for them to come out in 4th and 2 and just be like, everyone in the building, both staffs know we're running the football, and you still get 3 yards. I mean, that was basically how this game played out the whole day. It was like TCU knew Baylor was going to run the ball, and they still couldn't stop it. I haven't seen a Baylor team be able to run like that since 2021, where it's just like, hey, it doesn't matter what you're doing in front of us. We're still going to be able to run the football. Very impressive by Sawyer there. Again, another key conversion. He didn't have his best game, but at the biggest moments, he was making plays in this game, and that was really important. Bryson, another touchdown here. And so, Baylor's in a great spot as we kind of get to the end of this game.
I think there was a bit of wind. I don't know how much that played out on the field in terms of throwing the ball around. I think that probably affected some moments in the game throwing the ball. I think you saw some balls die or just kind of get caught up. I also think TCU's got a great secondary. There's also that. I mean, that was their strength on defense coming into this game, was their secondary. So you had to combat those things.
I was going to say Hoover didn't have a problem with it, but,
Well, no, because he was playing the Baylor secondary. So, he got half the combination. Sawyer got the wind and I don't know how much the wind mattered. I know that it was blowing crap all over the press box with the windows open. So if it was anything like that on the field, it definitely affected things. But, it was a tale of who you were playing against, and I think in Sawyer Robertson's case, that's a good TCU secondary. That's been their strength for most of the year. So, anyways, he navigated that pretty successfully, but that drive wasn't the end of this game, as TCU would make it look really easy on their response, and got a little bit of help on 2nd down and 10. Jackie Marshall with a roughing the passer when Baylor looked to have set up a 3rd down. So instead of a 3rd and 10, it is now 1st and 10. And instead of being at their own 37, they're now all the way out to around midfield as a result of this penalty. So I don't know. I haven't gone back and watched every little iteration of this game to get every little detail. I just absorbed what I saw on Saturday night. So I don't know about, was it a legit penalty on, every single instance of this? But, man, you just cannot have any penalties like this in a moment like this. I mean, he is so fortunate, just like Isaiah Hankins is very fortunate that missed extra point didn't come back to haunt you, and that's what's hanging over your head for the next 2 weeks or career. But Jackie Marshall, regardless of guilt level, had 2 massive penalties that could have really hurt this team. So that needs to get sorted out.
This was going to be 3rd and 10. You're exactly right. I mean, 3rd and 10, and you have a chance to put this game away. And you're just, from what my vantage point, I think that it was a borderline call. But the fact of the matter is, since he got the unsportsmanlike call earlier, I'm sure there was a lot of jawing, a lot of talking. And so when that happens and then you hit the quarterback high, you're going to get a flag almost every time. And so, just not a great play. Again, 2 plays by one of their best players. Jackie has had such a good year. It's been so impressive, but you can't have these 2 plays at 2 crucial times when your defense is playing pretty good. They have TCU in a bad spot, and then you're just giving them a 1st down, which you can't do against good offenses.
So 3rd and 10 at the TCU, 37 or so, turns into 1st and 10 at the Baylor 48. So that's it's a pretty big break you gave the Frogs there, and they would take advantage. But first, they had to convert another 4th down as you put them into a 4th and 3. And Josh Hoover hits Savion Williams for 17 yards. Just an absolute killer. Baylor calls a timeout, but in the very next play, the the secondary was obviously the weakness, and another difference is that Sawyer Robertson had some guys running open from time to time. He also had a lot of tight throws and tough catches guys had to make. TCU wide receivers were running wide open, like all night long, just running free across the field with dudes 10 yards away from them trying to trail. Like, it was scheme, I'm sure, in some cases, but, like, am I lying where they're just guys not running free, like, pretty much all night? And then here you go, Jack Besh, just nobody within 5 yards of him.
Yeah, and it felt like Baylor was running zone, and then you go back and watch the film, and a lot of times they weren't. I mean, it was literally man coverage, and there were guys wide open. The Savion first down was just a complete he just won the route completely. Jack Besh as well. Now, in fairness, TCU's got really good receivers, and they really did a good job of, I think, scheming against Baylor's secondary. But, yeah, they won more times than not, for sure.
No, they definitely won the passing contest against the Baylor secondary. But, yeah, Jack Besh, 24 yards, wide open, made it look really easy. They tie it up at 34 piece with 1:55 to go.
But Craig, I will say that touchdown, when they scored it, I was like, wow, that might actually play into Baylor's favor, though, because they left a lot of time on the clock. Baylor still had 3 timeouts, I think, at that point as well. And so if you're going to give up a touchdown, you'd rather just give it up right there, right? Because then you have time to move down the field and potentially win the game.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. You never know how it'll work out, but they did leave about 2 minutes on the clock, and that was enough time for Sawyer Robertson to move down the field, and that's what Baylor would do. I mean, this is a game where they don't do this earlier in the year. They end up, like, turning it over on 4th down, or they miss a field goal that doesn't give, like, something happens to where they don't do this, what they're about to do earlier in the year, but that's why this is a different team now at this point. Because they did go and take a win rather than the alternative, which we kind of got accustomed to here for a while. But the narrative is changing because of games like this, as they would start off with a heavy load to Bryson Washington, give him 3 carries to start this off, 5 yards, 4 yards, 7 yards. Then Sawyer Robertson a couple plays later, 14 yards to Josh Cameron on 2nd down and 10, another first down, and you are all the way already into TCU territory, but 30 seconds remaining, so there's time ticking away. 1st and 10 at the TCU 45, 25 seconds to go. Sawyer Robertson incompletion. Bryson Washington only runs for a yard, so now it's a massive 3rd and 9 at the TCU 44, 21 seconds left. So you're not in field goal range yet. You're close. You're also having a tough time throwing the ball. It's also the field's closing in on you now at this point, and it's like you've got to convert or you're done. So 3rd and 9, Baylor calls a timeout, but then Sawyer Robertson comes out of the timeout, throws the incomplete pass. It is 4th down and 9 at the TCU 44.
So I might be wrong on this, but this was where they called the pass interference and then picked the flag up, right?
Yeah, he throws it down the field to Hal Presley.
Crazy.
Down the sideline. I mean, I didn't think it was a penalty, but, I mean, it was also coming off of what happened in the 3rd quarter. Just the refs were just not good in the second half, especially if you're a Baylor fan. I mean, just so – but don't throw the flag to begin with.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing is, like, you threw the flag, so then everybody's like, okay, but then when you go and pick it up, that's when people are like, wait a second. And after you have, like, you threw the flag, bro. Mm-hmm. So why are you sitting here now having a meeting with the crew?
Because you saw something.
Right. So why did you throw it? And then they tell you, and like, I'm glad they got the call right, because I would hate for the call to be a bad call, and then the whole thing is like this, well, asterisk or whatever. But it was a flag that got picked up. So instead of it being maybe setting you up on the doorstep, it turns into a 4th and 9 after you're unable to convert on that pass to Hal Presley down the sideline. So 4th and 9, 16 seconds to go. And what do you do here? I mean, I'm thinking you're not going to convert because 4th and 9 is really hard to convert, and you're going to give TCU the football at around midfield, and they are going to run like 1 play, maybe 2, and they are going to kick a field goal and win the game. And it's going to be similar to 2 years prior when they walked you off and kept their playoff hopes alive, where they walked you off with no time left. That's exactly what I was expecting to happen here. I don't know about you, but I did not have a lot of – they had to go for it, in my opinion. But I was thinking, like, oh, God, they're going to not get this, and they're just going to basically hand them a win here.
Yeah, I felt like the game was going to come down to this play. I thought it was smart by Baylor to go out after the incompletion with your offense. So you forced TCU to burn a timeout, which I think was very smart initially. And then I was like, okay, now they're going to punt, right? That's what's going to happen here. And instead, Sora Robertson comes trotting right back out on the field, and you're just sitting there going, okay, so this is probably going to be the game. Because you're right, I had the same mindset of, oh, TCU needs to complete one 25-yard pass, and then they're in field goal range. Well, that's going to be a problem because Baylor's been giving that up all night. But obviously, that's not what happened.
But at the same time, like, you punt it away, and they still can hit a big play because they had all night long. I mean, who's to say that Savion Williams or Jack Bech doesn't pick up like a 50-yard pass and then, whatever. So I got the call. I think it was the right call. I think it was karma that you went and put your guts out there, and Sonny Dykes did the exact opposite a little while earlier, and I think you got rewarded for it. And I don't think that's always the case, but I think in this type of game, like, you deserve to get rewarded for having the stones to go for it here. And I also think that had you gone to overtime, you were not going to win this game, in my opinion. I think TCU would have won this game in overtime, so I wonder how much that was also weighing on them. But they go for it, and Sawyer Robertson hits Michael Trigg in the middle of the field, and you go back and watch it. I still, get anxiety watching it because the referee's right there, and it's like, I'm sure on the field it didn't look as close, but it's like, can you imagine Sawyer Robertson, dings off the helmet or the head of the official, and that's how the game ends, or it goes to overtime. So it was a very quick bang-bang in traffic, official standing right there, and he squeezes it in, and Michael Trigg makes the tough catch to just bring it in and get that first down, and it was an absolutely massive play. Baylor converts on 4th and 9, and then call a timeout. Out of the timeout, Bryson Washington with a run reminiscent of Shock Linwood in the TCU game 10 years prior with that team in attendance. It was very fitting. He runs, just needed actually a couple, just a few yards. He ends up getting 13, and actually, I think had to tell his lineman, put me down. We've got to get down. We're going to run out of time. That would have been a dumb way to go to overtime. But they get him down after pushing the pile all the way down to the TCU 16-yard line. TCU calls a timeout to try to ice Hankins, who comes out and eventually boosts the 33-yard field goal to win as time expires. Baylor 37, TCU 34. An incredible drive to close the game. And a big-time kick from Hankins, who redeems himself for the missed extra point earlier in the game that doesn't come back to cost them because he makes this kick here. Unlike the Colorado game when you had the kick to ice the game and put it out of reach, basically, another little bit of redemption, as that's kind of the story of the first half of this program and the second half of what we've seen so far. These last 3 games have been pretty special and certainly very uplifting and promising, and this the biggest of them all. The first win against TCU at home in 10 years, and with that same team in attendance, and your only second win since that time period as well, and your third straight win on the year to put you at 5-4. So, yeah, crowd storms the field.
Yeah.
Everybody goes crazy. And the team, I think, for the first time this year actually has some company while singing the Baylor line at the end of the game, whereas it's been kind of a desert afterwards because most people just filter out. Everybody stayed to the end for this one, obviously, celebrated with the team on the field, and it made for a really cool moment, and it was an incredible win in a variety of different ways. So, yeah, amazing stuff, and we haven't experienced anything like that around here in a really long time. It's been at least 2 years. If not longer in some cases, depending on where you kind of place this win. But, yeah, special stuff.
Incredible atmosphere, incredibly important for the program. Very fitting ending, like you mentioned with the 2014 team there. I just think in general that this was one of those games that, Baylor really, I think, has cemented themselves as a team that is trending up now. The momentum that they've gained over the last 3 weeks really shows that this is a good football team. This has finally gotten to a point where they're good, and now it's just about riding that momentum. But to get a win like this against TCU in a game where you didn't force any turnovers, you really weren't getting after the quarterback extremely effectively, you had to win kind of a shootout by the end of it. It was really impressive. And I think, Dave Aranda, Jake Spavital, Sawyer Robertson, the run game, this offensive line that is just growing and growing. I mean, everyone deserves a lot of credit for this win. Even the defense at times, they made some plays. And like we mentioned, a few penalties here or there, and TCU probably, maybe only scores 27 points. But you can't take those back. And so in general, really good performance. I won't say this was a complete performance, but it was a really good one, especially against your rival in a game that there was a lot of attention put on it, a lot of motivation put on it, and you went out there and you lived up to the hype and you didn't falter like we've seen over the past 2 years. Anytime this team got into a, quote unquote big game spot, they've lost. And now you're starting to see that trend change.
Yeah, and the change, as much as anything, is the players are making plays. That along with just getting better is, Sawyer Robertson and Michael Trigg convert that fourth down. You have big runs by Bryson Washington. Like, getting healthy has helped tremendously. Your O-line's gotten better, but guys are going out and taking the win. And not, let's see what happens. Like, let's go out and, like you hear Sawyer Robertson, like, let's go win this football game. And I don't think they've had that confidence for a long while. You may say that because that's what you're supposed to say, but, like, to have the actual belief, I don't know that the actual belief has really been there. And now it's there. And now they can go into any game the rest of the way and go, like, we can go win this game. Yeah. Whereas before, I think Colorado, BYU, Utah, like, those games were not exactly like this. Like, Utah, Cam Rising got hurt, and that changed that game. BYU, you drowned yourself in the first quarter, basically. But they just didn't have that one extra play or that extra layer of confidence to go out and go do it. And this time they said, we're going to go win this freaking football game. And they did it, and they did that in Lubbock, and they did that against Oklahoma State. And so they've won a blowout. They pulled away from Oklahoma State. Instead of letting that linger, they just said, hey, we got to go take this game and not make this something. And they did that. And in this game, hey, we got to go out and go make the plays to win this game. And Bryson Washington did that, and Sawyer Robertson and Michael Trigg and various others went and did that. And obviously Isaiah Hankins there at the end made the kick to win the game. And man, that's how good things happen. And so good things happening right now in Waco with 3 straight wins, and definitely not cooling off everything. I mean, you can't finish 5-7. So you'll enjoy this one, though, and I think it comes at a good time because, sure, you'd love to keep playing when you're on a winning streak, but I also think you're a little bit banged up, and you can kind of reset your focus and just lock in on just West Virginia and being as good as you can there and hopefully winning that 6th game, and for the first time ever winning in Morgantown. You want to talk about streaks. 2013 never won in Morgantown. 2014 didn't win in Morgantown. Nobody's ever won in Morgantown on the Baylor football side of things. So you can go make, like, true, brand new, fresh history rather than breaking streaks and hearkening back to the past. But they'll have a little time to just reset, enjoy this, and then get back to work for the closing stretch. But they're in a much better position than anybody really could have imagined early on with the way the season started. You were optimistic they could get here, but you didn't know for sure, and here they are. So should make for a fun final 3 games of the season when the time comes here in a few days.
Right, and I mean, how big of a difference has the offensive line been for this team? It's been staggering. It's the first time since 2015 that Baylor has had 3 straight Big 12 games in which they've ran for at least 250 yards. That since 2015, which was the year where they were running the Wildcat with Johnny Jefferson by the end of the season. Just staggering numbers what they're doing right now. And we knew the schedule turnover was going to be easier as far as the defenses that they were facing, but it hasn't just been easier. It's completely changed, the way Baylor's been able to play and the way Baylor's been able to succeed up front. I think putting Sidney Fugar at left tackle has clearly paid major dividends. And they're just gelling at the right time. And they got 3 more matchups here where, at least 2 of them you feel pretty good about the matchup for the run game. Again, Houston is maybe the outlier, even though they've had some games where they've given up yards as well.
Not on the ground, though. That'll be a game, where they're going to have to figure some things out. But Houston will get in a little slugfest with you and make it gross and like doing that, whereas Baylor's more of a finesse team, I think, at this point in terms of putting points on the board. They're not trying to get into a 17-14 style game necessarily, but with the run game, you feel better about that. But the run game's not what you do against Houston necessarily. That's going to be when the time comes. That will be interesting. But I don't think you want to get into like a low-scoring affair with them. But first, you got to go beat West Virginia. So they should be able to run on West Virginia. They should be able to do a lot of what we've seen lately against West Virginia. But West Virginia is probably looking at them going, we should be able to throw the football in this team, and we should be able to do this and that. So I think another Big 12 game where it'll be a coin flip, and whoever goes out and makes the most important plays, throughout the game and down the stretch will be the one that wins the game. And in this case, they made the important plays down the stretch and won this game against TCU to put themselves in a really great position as the second bye week now begins. So there is that. And before we get into what is a lot of questions, and I can almost guarantee we're not going to get to all of them, let's talk basketball so that we put the time in because we got like 15 questions. I want to at least touch on basketball and acknowledge them as the season got started last night for the Baylor men, and then we can get to whatever we have time for the rest of the way. But last night, the Baylor men, number 8 team in the country, facing off with number 6 Gonzaga, Sanford, Pentagon, and a late tip-off in this one. Not sure how many people stayed up to watch this one or not, but if you didn't, you didn't miss anything. And if you forgot it was on because it was so late, or you woke up this morning and saw the final score, I bet you were a bit startled by the fact that Gonzaga not only won, but they won by nearly 50 points. That's not a typo coming out of my mouth. 50 points, nearly 48, the final margin, 101-63. Gonzaga wins huge, and the Baylor men start the season 0-1, and they'll get better, but my gosh, that was an ugly start to the season, and Gonzaga with a big emphatic statement with this blowout victory.
It was ugly on all fronts. I mean, this Baylor team literally looked like they have not played together at all. That's kind of how it felt. It felt like Gonzaga's just played together for years. I know Gonzaga had a lot of returning guys, and it showed. I mean, they played so well as a team. They really picked apart Baylor's defense completely, which, was a question coming in because Baylor defensively the last few years have not played well. And that's continued, in this game. And I think the problem for me when I watched this game is like what we thought was going to be the issue for this team was exactly the issue. Baylor just kept giving up layups. I mean, they didn't have any real, rim protection. They didn't have any real answer for the pick and roll game. Baylor tried to switch everything, which you ended up having, Jeremy Roach or Jaden Nunn or Rob Wright guarding a big. And that's just not going to work. You're going to give up layups a lot. That's exactly what they did in this game. I mean, Gonzaga's bigs just, they feasted in this game. And they showed kind of a blueprint for where Baylor could be in trouble. They got a lot of bigger guys. They got, a bunch of 6'7", 6'8" guys that they can throw out there and play, the 3 in many stretches, even the 2 in some stretches with Ajayi. And so I think it ended up being a bad matchup. It also is one of those things where you're kind of playing on the road in your first game. And this is sometimes why you would rather play kind of a cupcake game, your first game, just to kind of, work out some of the things that you're working on. But instead they go into this environment and they just get destroyed. And the problem is that this is going to be a game that will potentially haunt Baylor come the tournament time. Like, you lose by 40 to anybody, and that's going to look like a pretty big blemish on your resume. So unfortunate performance, one that definitely makes me a little bit cautious about this team. The good news is they get a top 15 battle against Arkansas on Saturday and a chance to kind of make up for what just happened.
Yeah, potentially, or just fall a little bit further into an 0-2 hole. That'll be interesting to see. And, yeah, I was saying 50. My math is terrible. It was nearly 40-point win. So my correction there, I had added extra sauce where it's not necessary. My math skills are terrible, so I thought it was closer to 50, but no, closer to 40-point blowout. That makes it totally better. Totally not as big of a deal that it was only a nearly 40-point blowout. But no, 38-point loss for the Bears against Gonzaga to open things up, and now number 16 Arkansas coming up at home this weekend. So that'll be an interesting game
in Dallas. It'll be in Dallas.
In Dallas. Yeah, excuse me. That game in Dallas at the American Airlines Center. So if you're going up there for that one, which I imagine a lot of people are, enjoy. Bears are favored, but not an easy second step out the door to start the season, especially when you got popped right the first moment you open the door. last night with Gonzaga. So, yeah, that'll be dangerous, but potentially a nice bounce-back win. So, safe travels to everybody going up to Dallas this weekend for what should be a pretty good game. And then, meanwhile, the women have Incarnate Word coming up on Thursday at the Foster Pavilion. So, Incarnate Word and the number 12 Baylor women will get things started up this Thursday. So we'll talk about some of that next week. But let's get into the mailbag and get to a lot of questions, and we'll try to get to all of them, but can't promise anything here. Somewhat less than perfect. Was looking at Big 12 team stats. It appears we have won the games against opponents ranked below us defensively and lost the games against those who are currently ranked above. Of the 3 remaining games, only West Virginia is ranked lower than Baylor defensively. Do you feel this has any correlation or is just a fluke? These rankings are obviously fluid, but just thought I'd toss it out there.
So I think the correlation is a fluke, like Baylor's defense being ranked below the opponent defense. I don't think that really matters. I think the main thing that you need to look at here is when Baylor has faced a defense that's ranked outside the top 50, Baylor has feasted. And that is what they're seeing on their schedule. West Virginia, metrics-wise, they're ranked 73rd. Kansas is 65th. And Houston, they're ranked 56th. I think they're better than that, but they just have some uneven performances that are skewing that. They're going to be the biggest challenge, I think, for Baylor's offense, but they also have by far the worst offense of the group here as well. So I guess correlating it like this, I would call it a fluke. I think the bigger takeaway is when Baylor has faced a bad defense, they have absolutely played well.
I also think the offense is a lot better off now than it was in those early games as well. I mean, in terms of just having improved. So if you were to go redo the Utah BYU games, I think you have a little bit of a different result. Let's see. Useless Kim degree. What separates Sawyer as such a confidence-inspiring leader for this team? It feels like he galvanizes the team in a way that Blake or Gary never could.
Ooh, I think that's a little shade at Gary. I think Gary was a really good leader. He just didn't have the talent that Sawyer does. So Sawyer's going out there and winning games for Baylor. Like we've seen him go out and truly win a game for Baylor. Gary didn't really do that. Because they just ran the ball. They let their defense go out and win them games. So it was a different approach, but Gary definitely was a really good leader. I think that the other thing with Sawyer is he's, I think, a little more vocal and a little more, just, again, making more plays on the field to actually lead to winning. But I think as far as just leadership, he and Gary are pretty close. But, yeah, Sawyer's a great leader, and that's going to be huge for Baylor to have him this year. And then to have him again next year, I mean, he might be the best quarterback in the Big 12 next year.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far because we've definitely – I mean, I totally get what you're saying, but I do feel like we've done that before, like even with Blake Shaper, like after the Big 12 championship game. Like he could – you start looking – but I think with Sawyer, that's something you can really look at and go like, yeah, why couldn't he be with Spavital and these receivers? And you can start looking down and really get excited about the possibilities, which for a program trying to sell the future, that's a big deal. And that's pretty huge to feel like you've got the guy – DeQuan Finn, that whole situation's just been strange. He's been hurt. He was supposed to be the guy, and he wasn't because he got hurt. And then Sawyer just said, "This is my job, pal. Sorry, buddy." I do think that DeQuan Finn could have probably gashed that TCU defense like a little change up here and there. They didn't need it, but clearly they won't need to go get a DeQuan Finn next offseason because of what Sawyer's done.
Yeah.
They'll need to fill out the room in some way, but he's established himself as the guy, and yes, as one of the better quarterbacks in the league, and he can have some buzz created if he finishes strong this season. But, I think Gary was a great leader. Gary was a really good leader and much, much better than you're probably giving him credit for. I can't speak to Blake as much. He was a quieter guy, but Gary was a leader. Alpha Needle, how would Sawyer have performed in the Browse offense, and how would Petty perform in the Spavital offense?
I think Sawyer would have done just fine in the Browse offense. I think he can make a lot of the throws. Petty was really good, though. So, it's kind of hard to translate the two. I think Petty's arm was bigger than Sawyer's, which would have led to which did lead to more explosive plays. I actually think in this offense, I think Sawyer is a better fit for it, just this iteration of the offense, just because Petty's not quite the runner that Sawyer is.
Sawyer's a way better runner.
Yeah,
than Petty,
right.
Yeah.
Faster, much more explosive. You can rely on him in fourth down situations to get you first downs. And again, for an offensive line that is still kind of growing, I think you need someone more like Sawyer who can avoid sacks a little bit better. So it's interesting to look back on that, but I think both would have performed well, but I think I like Petty in that Browse offense better, and I like Sawyer in this offense better.
Yeah, I think they probably could have had success going both ways just because both are talented players and they're, creative offenses, but I do think they're in the perfect spots were in the perfect spots for themselves. And I'll say, Alfanito, I'm glad you brought up Bryce because we don't have a lot of time to get into like all of the hoopla from this weekend and all the festivities. Like maybe at some point we can carve out some time for some of that. Although I guess there's not really a ton to say other than it was just cool to see all these guys back and older and with kids and wives and all of that. Like that was kind of crazy. Some gray hairs, I think probably in some cases. But the pictures I saw from the guys touring the new facility, I hadn't even thought about that, about the new what's the building's name? I'm blanking on it.
The development center?
Yeah. The
Fudge
Center.
Yeah.
Gosh. To see them walking around the Fudge Center and to see Corey Coleman, who I didn't know if he was going to be in town this weekend or not. I knew Bryce was and various others, but I didn't know about Corey Coleman. And there's Corey Coleman with his girl and his kid, and he's standing in front of this big picture of him up inside the new Fudge Center. And just to see that, like I'm sure that had to be the coolest thing in the world for him, to see like that, just his picture in this brand new facility and coming back and celebrating 10 years and all these things and having his family with him. And then Bryce is next to his picture in the facility. And I just thought that was really cool to see something like that I wasn't even thinking about heading into this weekend. So I think that was a healthy weekend for everybody involved in a variety of different ways. And that was also one of the benefits, was seeing the old guys come back and see how they're still being acknowledged and
I agree.
and talked about and celebrated. So that was really cool. Scotty B, the Baylor. How would you grade our O-line this year so far compared to the rest of the Big 12? Also from Alpha Needle. Thank you, Alpha Needle.
So, Baylor's in the top 40 in the country in sacks allowed, and then in rushing offense, they're in the top 5 in the Big 12 right now. So, I think there were questions coming in about where this offensive line could go. And I thought, I kind of mentioned before the season, I thought they could get to average for the Big 12. And I'd actually say they're outperforming that. I think this is probably a top 6, top 7 group in the Big 12 at this moment, which I would have never thought that I'd be able to say that at the beginning of the year. I was thinking more something like, maybe they could get to 10, and that would be kind of around average for the league. But they're performing very, very well. And yeah, I think they're kind of around 7, maybe 6 in the Big 12 now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair ranking. I wouldn't know really how to dive too much further into it. All I know is that they have greatly improved as the season's gone along. Shout out to Mason Miller, offensive line coach, probably the least heralded assistant on staff, the least well-known because he was added so late, and, just O-line doesn't always get a lot of credit, but they get a lot of blame, and they've certainly had their fair share, and they've done a really good job of gelling. It's just taken a little while, and it's been great to see. And it also helps that Bryson Washington is who he is and makes their job easier and vice versa, and it's turned into a really good relationship and one that needs to continue blossoming, but it's been as much of the reason as why they're winning football games now as anything else. Scotty B, the Baylor King. Who's saltier, TCU fans losing to Baylor this weekend or Texas Tech fans, including the AD's wife, on the Big 12 ruling on the headsets? Yes, this was an interesting story last week. Tech basically accusing TCU and Baylor of stealing their headset communications. TCU and Baylor apparently were the first to discover this because of the guy that works with them at AT&T Stadium, I believe. Like there's their communications, I guess, guy. It's kind of how they ended up finding out about this. Told the Big 12. Big 12 didn't tell everybody. Like they just told some of the people, but not everybody. And it led to a really bad look for, I think, Brett, you were marking the conference, of not having properly informed their teams of this potential issue. And it also opens the door for teams to just throw out accusations. And in this case, Texas Tech leaning heavy into it. Kirby Hokut's wife, talking cover-up and crap. I don't know what happened. In this case, I know it's college football, so if you were to tell me that somebody was stealing something, yeah, probably. If you were to tell me that, I'm going to believe it. It's college football. We just had a documentary on Connor Stallions and Michigan celebrating the national championship, so I'm not going to shed tears over this story, but I also don't have nearly enough information to know what's exactly what, and I'm not just going to blindly follow Texas Tech boosters and say, oh, well, that must have happened then. And, yeah, that's the only reason you lost those games, because that's kind of what they're saying.
That is what they're saying.
Yeah, it's absolutely what they're saying.
Which is a joke. Complete joke.
But regardless, that's the amount of energy I'm going to spend on it until you show me something that I need to really focus in on. This is college football, and life goes on. So that's my feelings on it. But TCU, are they saltier? Texas Tech beat Iowa State, so that kind of took some of the salt away for them. But I think they're probably still the saltier fan base because TCU just takes their lump and moves on. Texas Tech is going to, dwell on this probably for quite a while. But also, every game they lose from now on, people will be cracking jokes about, must have stolen your signals, so prepare for that.
Right, yeah, it's definitely Tech. TCU fans, honestly, I think they'll just point to the fact that they've really kind of owned Baylor, and this was just a one-off type game. But Tech, I mean, this is honestly a ridiculous story. I mean, you can handle this in a very different way than they did. They chose to handle it the way they did, so publicly. And honestly, and then they go out and they beat Iowa State, so they're probably sitting there thinking, we should be at the top of the conference now and winning every game from here on out. And the reality is that's not Texas Tech football right now. And so I think that it's just a joke that they're kind of trying to blame this on headsets when, your quarterback's fumbling the football when you're in field goal range to win a game against TCU. Was that the headsets, or you're giving up 59 points to Baylor? I mean, was that the players not making a block, not making a play? No. And so I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit ridiculous, and they're definitely the saltier fan base at this point.
Yeah, you're gonna have to give me more to go off of to really get a different opinion on this. But again, this is college football, and that kind of comes with the territory. So I don't know what the truth is. I do know that Baylor beat the mess out of them in Lubbock, and then TCU beat them in Fort Worth, and that's what the records say. So they are very lucky, fortunate that they went and beat Iowa State, or otherwise they would really be sitting in some dirt right now, and I don't know how good they'd be feeling, but they got that, so we'll see how they finish out. But to see the AD's wife popping off and the big booster, and that's the other part of it. Of course, the big booster, who is Joey's guy, is wanting this to be true, because he's the guy when they lose who people are like, you're wasting your money. This coaching staff sucks. These players aren't good enough. He's the guy that gets all the blame because he's the money guy. So, of course, he wants this to be a thing because that takes the heat off of 2 losses. And we can say, well, we just got cheated out of this. So, yeah, I mean, that's all the energy we'll spend unless there's ever a reason to spend more on it. But I do think Tech is definitely the saltier, and that's not changing that result in Lubbock, unfortunately for them. Northwestern Bear, who are 2 to 3 possible receivers on the roster who could rise up to a starter next year? Can you share names of wide receiver portal targets?
So, I mean, I think the only guy on the roster who you're like, that's going to be a starter next year is Josh Cameron. I think he's the only one that you can absolutely rely on. I think, Jaden Porter could ascend to this level, but for me, I think the starters are probably going to be Josh Cameron and then 2 transfer portal wide receivers. And then I think Jaden Porter will be in the mix in that group. And then I think you're looking at the freshmen as other guys that you'll kind of mix in. But I think they're going to need 2 big-name wide receivers, in my eyes, out of the transfer portal to make up for everyone. I mean, they're losing a ton at wide receiver, so they need some more experience there, some more proven commodities. As far as transfer portal targets, it's way too early for that. If I were saying guys, it'd be guys that are still at other schools. And so we'll wait till guys start entering the transfer portal and then kind of go from there, because it's far too early right now.
Overall, Minion, where do you think the staff will focus their efforts over the bye? Seems like the first bye did wonders. Would you anticipate a similar step forward to be made after the second one?
I think you'll see some wrinkles, especially on defense. I think the defense is going to need to make some changes going forward into these next few weeks. You still have 2 very explosive offenses that you're going to have to deal with. So I think they need to figure out a way to start limiting those plays, because they gave up a bunch of them against TCU. And then for the offense, I think it's just more about reps. I mean, they need more and more reps in this offense. Obviously, Spav will probably have a few more additions to the playbook since this is still year 1. He's probably going to utilize every chance to try to add. But I think the repetitions are the biggest thing for this offense. And I do think there will be some steps forward. I don't think they'll be as drastic, though, as the first bye week.
All right, 5-minute countdown, and we got like 7 or 8 questions. So let's see how much of this we can get to. BU grad 21, what do y'all think of our chances to win out? Morgantown is always a challenge, so is that too optimistic? I don't think so. I think I said this after the first bye week. I think every game on the schedule is winnable. I still feel that way. I think that's life in the Big 12 for everybody. Houston's a great example of that. So I think going and winning in Morgantown is absolutely possible. I think winning out's absolutely possible. I don't think that's being too optimistic, but the key will be if this team continues playing to the level they've been playing and if they keep incrementally improving each week, that will be the key. The moment they start to go, oh, we've won 3 games in a row, we're back, that's when they'll get slapped around and kicked back to reality. So it's all about how they continue to focus and execute, to use cliche terms, but that's why everybody uses them, is because that's what works, is execution and focus, and they've been doing both of those things for the last month. So that's the key. But, yeah, they can absolutely win in Morgantown. I
think finishing 7-5, so going 2-1 in this final stretch is the more realistic scenario, but it's definitely possible. As far as chances go to win out, so I'd probably put it at maybe like a 40% chance that they win all 3 of these games. But definitely a chance. They can for sure do it, and these 3 teams that they're about to play are not that good.
D-Bear 11, Koa Pete update if you have one, please.
Not much of an update. It feels like things are trending in a different direction away from Baylor is what it kind of feels like at the moment. Things were different right after the visit, but it feels like things have cooled down in the days following it.
And he is a power forward, so he's a basketball recruit out of Arizona. Correct?
Top five recruit. Yep.
Yeah, just for those not aware of that name. So nothing new on the big-time basketball prospect. Thank you, D-Bear. Kenny's Doc, what's the ruling regarding late TCU defensive subs that cost us a timeout in the first half? Why don't more teams lollygag their subs in at the last minute like TCU was doing to try to cost timeouts or delay of game penalties? Thanks.
That was very smart of them. And, yes, teams do this, but this was
also Baylor's fault.
It was, because Hal Presley came off the field with like 10 seconds left on the play clock. So TCU was like, oh, get a guy off the field, like bring him out. It was a very late substitution, so it was definitely on Baylor, but it was also very smart of TCU to just be like, yeah, they're going to have to burn a timeout.
Yeah, if Baylor doesn't substitute there, TCU can't substitute.
Yep.
But because Baylor did that, that was a big mistake, because then TCU goes, oh, well, shoot, and then they can just lollygag off the field and tick, 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 tick. So, yeah, that was more Baylor opening and allowing that moment. So, yeah. That's where that was. 1964, Bear, what can we do to shore up our defensive secondary?
I don't think you're going to see it completely flip until the offseason. I think they got to add some more talent, add some more guys, just scheme-wise, be able to draw up some more things, potentially if Dave Aranda's in his second year as defense coordinator. I think they'll come in with some wrinkles during this bye week, but I just don't know if they have the overall talent to turn into some elite secondary. But I think they could maybe get a little bit better. Again, potentially putting guys in different positions, maybe. But I think in general, it's just going to be more about scheme because the talent is what the talent is at this point.
Sammy Grace Bear, WV has a solid run D. Do we regress back to earlier in the season, averaging 4 yards a carry? Do we continue to build the momentum of a solid run game, thinking 4.5 to 5 yards per carry?
I think Baylor will run the ball okay in this game. I'm not really scared of West Virginia's run defense.
Should add this, or do you think this is a game where we decide to ride Sawyer's arm to exploit their weakness and Spav's okay with 80 to 120 rushing yards?
Yeah, I think he'd be more okay with 150 yards rushing. Maybe not 250 yards, but I do think Sawyer's arm is going to play a huge role in this game. West Virginia's secondary is probably the worst in the Big 12, so I expect them to exploit that.
All right, I think I'm going to skip West Virginia questions to try and finish out these, and maybe we carry those over. Go Bears go, bye week or keep playing. I actually think the bye week's a good time to sort of reset after this run, but I would totally understand keep playing because you're on such a run. But I do think that you can lock in and go, all right, 3 games, here we go, let's reset. But we now know how we can play. So I think the bye week's okay, but I would totally get if you wanted to keep playing.
Bye week after this emotional game is kind of where I'm at.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. Bear Sack, Aranda's mentioned a few times in PCs how difficult it has been navigating defensive coordinator responsibilities this season. It sounds very much like he would prefer not doing it Would you rather Aranda continue to call the defense in 25 or hire a solid DC like Jim Leonard?
Continue to call the defense.
Yeah,
I don't think you can make that change after 1 year. He needs to continue doing it until they're completely shored up there.
Do we have talent developing to improve the defense in 25, or will all improvements have to come from portal next year?
There is some talent for sure to develop, but I do think you're going to have to attack the portal. Like, if you don't, again, you're setting yourself up for failure. You got to go get guys who are proven commodities, especially at the jack position, potentially at the mic to replace Matt Jones, and then potentially in the secondary as well. They need to continue adding talent while also developing the roster, and then I think you will see some improvements.
All right, so we're going to have to stop there. GMAC, I see your questions, but since they pertain to West Virginia and to basketball, remind me to carry those over if you would, or I'll set a reminder for myself. But either way, we'll get to GMAC's question next week.
Okay.
Because we have a hard out here, so no Big 12 picks. With Baylor not playing, not a big deal this weekend really, but should be a really fun weekend as it has been in the Big 12. Last weekend just kind of throwing everything in upheaval except for BYU. They just are now alone. K-State's dropped another game. And also Iowa State's now dropped a game. So BYU, they're sitting in the driver's seat, but here's Colorado. Here's K-State still. Iowa State should be an interesting weekend. But I will enjoy the Bears getting a break and just being able to kind of kick back and watch it. So there's obviously basketball ongoing as well. Anything before we head on out of here for this edition?
Just be sure to check out Sikkim 365 Premium side. Tons of recruit reactions from the weekend, recruiting notes, basketball notes, since that's in full swing now, and of course all of our football coverage as well. So be sure to check out the premium side of Sikkim 365.
Yeah, it's a good time to join, especially after the big win over TCU and now the start of basketball season, even if it didn't start kindly for Scott Drew and the men. A long way to go. And, hey, the football team, we were talking about them the very first couple games. Like, things weren't great. Now look where we are. So I'm sure basketball will be similar to that. GMAC, get back to us next week. But for everybody else who asked questions along with GMAC, appreciate everybody in that mailbag. And hopefully you got what you were looking for. And we will be back to answer more questions next week. Thanks to Garrett Ross. Behind the scenes before you go, if you're watching on YouTube, live Tuesdays at 11 a.m. or after the fact, please, we're close to 4,000 now. So we just need like a couple dozen, if not even that more. So if you haven't, please hit that like button, but also that subscribe button and help us get to 4,000 on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page. Until then, we will talk to you next Tuesday at 11 a.m. For Garrett Ross and Grayson Grundhoefer, I'm Craig Smoak, and this has been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com.